My name is Audrey Sinclair, and until 2 years ago, I believed family treasures were safe simply because they belonged to family. I was wrong. People think heirlooms are about money. They're not. They're memories you can touch. My grandmother's silver tea service still carried tiny scratches from Sunday dinners she'd hosted for 40 years. My grandfather's pocket watch stopped forever at exactly 2:17 p.m., the moment he collapsed while repairing the old church clock in our hometown. My mother's sapphire engagement ring wasn't worth millions, but she'd slipped it into my hand before she passed away and whispered, "Protect what tells our story." Those words stayed with me long after she was gone. Before we dive deeper, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking betrayals, hidden truths, and unforgettable justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. I lived in Burlington, Vermont, in the same restored farmhouse where 4 generations of my family had celebrated birthdays, Christmas mornings, weddings, and countless ordinary Tuesdays that somehow became precious memories. I worked as an archivist at the County Historical Museum. Maybe that's why preserving history mattered so much to me. Objects carried stories. People forgot. Objects remembered. My husband, Gavin Mercer, used to tease me about it. "You'd probably rescue an old chair before rescuing me." I'd laugh. "I can replace you easier than Grandma's rocking chair." He'd grin. For years, jokes like that felt harmless. We'd been married 16 years, no children. Not because we didn't want them. Life simply had different plans. After years of heartbreak, we quietly accepted that our little farmhouse would remain peaceful and childless. Instead, we filled it with weekend guests, nieces, nephews, neighbors, and enough laughter that the silence never seemed lonely. Or at least, I thought it wasn't lonely. Looking back now, I realize Gavin had begun changing long before I noticed. It started with little things. Late-night phone calls. Closed office doors. New passwords. A habit of checking the mailbox before I came home. He always had explanations. It's work. It's taxes. It's refinancing. It's nothing. That dangerous little word. Because nothing slowly became everything. One Saturday afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the garage. He looked exhausted. There were unopened bills scattered beside him. "You okay?" I asked. He smiled too quickly. "Just tired." I picked up one envelope. He immediately grabbed it from my hand. "I've got it." That wasn't like him. We'd always shared everything. Now suddenly, he'd got it. I wanted to believe him. Marriage sometimes meant trusting people during seasons you didn't fully understand. So I trusted him. Months passed. Then one rainy Thursday, I opened the china cabinet to polish Grandma Eleanor's tea set before hosting my book club. The middle serving tray was gone. I frowned. Maybe I'd stored it elsewhere after Thanksgiving. I searched every cabinet, every closet. Nothing. "Gavin? Yeah? Have you seen Grandma's silver tray?" He didn't even look up from his laptop. "No. I can't find it." He shrugged. "You probably packed it away." That explanation satisfied me for exactly 5 minutes. Then I searched the attic, the basement, every storage box. Nothing. When I mentioned it again over dinner, he sighed dramatically. "Audrey, it's one serving tray." "No." I looked him directly in the eyes. "It isn't." He rolled his eyes. "You always overreact." Maybe I did. Or maybe my instincts were trying to warn me. Over the next 3 months, another item disappeared. Grandfather's compass. Then an antique music box. Then my mother's crystal vase. Each time, another excuse. "You misplaced it. You donated it. You boxed it up. You forgot." Forgot. I cataloged thousands of historical artifacts for a living. Remembering objects was literally my profession. One evening I finally snapped. "I'm not imagining this." Gavin slammed his fork onto the table. "Do you hear yourself? I'm asking where our family heirlooms are." "Our?" The word slipped out before he caught himself. "Our?" I stared at him. "They're my family's." He immediately corrected himself. "You know what I mean." But I did know what he meant. For the first time, those treasures weren't memories to him. They were possessions, assets, things. I couldn't explain why that frightened me so much. Winter settled across Vermont. Snow blanketed the fields around our farmhouse. Life looked peaceful from the outside. Inside, Something invisible was breaking. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was restoring Civil War letters at the museum. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored them. Something told me to answer. Hello? A polite woman's voice responded. May I speak with Audrey Sinclair? This is she. My name is Lillian Cross, and I'm calling from the Ashcroft Heritage Auction Gallery. I frowned. I think you've got the wrong person. I hope so, she replied gently. We're preparing an estate auction this weekend. Okay. One of the consignments includes several pieces matching a family collection registered under the Sinclair name. I stopped breathing. I'm sorry, she continued. A silver tea service engraved Eleanor Whitmore Sinclair, 1958. My hands began shaking. What? A pocket watch engraved to Samuel Whitmore. I nearly dropped my phone. And, her voice softened, a sapphire ring accompanied by handwritten documentation indicating it belonged to Margaret Sinclair. My mother's ring. The room spun around me. Where did you get those? I'm afraid I can't disclose the consignor over the phone. I whispered. Those were stolen. Silence. Then the woman spoke carefully. I suspected you might say that. Everything inside me went cold. She took one quiet breath before adding the sentence that changed my life forever. Mrs. Sinclair, the man who sold them claimed he was your husband. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The museum around me faded into a blur of voices, footsteps, and the faint hum of the climate control system that protected centuries-old documents. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles turned white. I'm sorry, I finally managed. Could you repeat that? The consignor identified himself as your husband, Lillian said carefully. His name on the paperwork is Gavin Mercer. Every sound around me disappeared. I stared at the faded Civil War letters spread across my desk, but all I could see was my mother's face on the afternoon she gave me her sapphire ring. Protect what tells our story. I had failed her. Lillian, I said, forcing myself to remain calm. Please don't sell anything. We've already removed the collection from the auction floor. You have. Something about the paperwork concerned me. My heartbeat slowed just enough for me to think. What concerned you? There were inconsistencies. What kind? The consignor claimed he'd inherited everything after the passing of his wife's mother. My mother died 12 years ago. I know. The words escaped before I realized what I was saying. My mother left those items to me. Lillian was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Sinclair, that's exactly why I called. I closed my office door before continuing. You believed something wasn't right. I've worked in estate auctions for 23 years. Her voice remained steady. You learn to recognize the difference between someone selling family possessions and someone trying to turn memories into quick cash. A chill ran through me. So, he looked desperate? He looked frightened. That answer surprised me. Frightened? Not grieving. Not sentimental. She paused. He kept asking how quickly he'd be paid. My stomach twisted. When was this? 5 days ago. 5 days. 5 days ago. Gavin had kissed me goodbye before work, reminded me to pick up milk on the way home, and texted me a heart emoji during lunch. 5 days ago. He had sold my family's history. I need to come there. I think that's wise. Will you hold everything? I already have. I thanked her repeatedly before hanging up. For several minutes, I sat completely still. Then I opened our joint banking app. The balance was lower than I expected. Not dramatically, just enough to make me uneasy. I checked our savings account. Lower again. Then I noticed several transfers I didn't recognize. $5,000, $3,000, another $7,000, each labeled simply, transfer authorized. My pulse quickened. We had always discussed large expenses. Always. I opened older statements. The same pattern appeared. Small withdrawals, then larger ones, then even larger. Over nearly 18 months. How had I missed them? Because I'd trusted him. Because I'd assumed that if Gavin handled the bills, he handled them responsibly. Because marriage teaches you that trust is easier than suspicion. By the time I drove home that evening, snow had begun falling again. The farmhouse looked exactly as it always had. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. It looked like the safest place on earth. Inside, Gavin was chopping vegetables for dinner. He smiled. Hey! I stared at him. He noticed immediately. Everything okay? I placed my purse on the table. I got a phone call today. He kept chopping. Oh? From an auction house. The knife stopped moving. Only for a fraction of a second. Then it continued. That's random. They have my grandmother's tea service. His shoulders stiffened. They have my grandfather's pocket watch. Silence. My mother's sapphire ring. The knife slipped from his hand and clattered onto the cutting board. He didn't look at me. Instead, he slowly picked it up. I can explain. Those 3 words shattered something inside me. You can? He finally faced me. I was going to tell you. When? I just needed time. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe this conversation was real. You sold my family's heirlooms. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I stared at him. So it happened accidentally? No. Did someone force you? No. Did you think they belonged to you? He rubbed his forehead. I needed money. For what? He looked away. Debt. What debt? It got out of control. What got out of control? He wouldn't answer. I took one slow step closer. Gavin. Still nothing. What kind of debt? His voice was barely audible. Business loans. What business? I invested. In what? He swallowed hard. I thought I could double our savings. I felt sick. Our savings? He nodded. It started small. How much? I lost 10,000. I closed my eyes. And then? I borrowed to recover it. And then? I lost again. Every answer was worse than the last. And then? I borrowed more. How much? He whispered a number. $280,000. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. What? He repeated it. $280,000. The room tilted beneath my feet. We don't have that kind of money. I know. So where did it come from? I kept borrowing. From who? Lenders. What lenders? He hesitated. Private lenders. The fear in his eyes suddenly made sense. Not guilt. Fear. Real fear. They're threatening me. I wanted to feel sorry for him. Instead, I felt furious. You sold my mother's ring. I was trying to protect us. I couldn't believe he'd said that. You were protecting yourself. I didn't want them coming here. So you emptied our savings. I thought I'd win it back. You gambled? He looked at the floor. The silence answered for him. You gambled. It wasn't casinos. I don't care what it was. His shoulders sagged. It was online sports betting. The words echoed through the kitchen. Sports betting. The man who used to lecture me about spending too much on antique books had secretly gambled away nearly $300,000. How long? He whispered. 3 years. 3 years. 3 years of lies. 3 years of pretending everything was normal. 3 years of looking me in the eyes every morning. 3 years of watching me dust family heirlooms he'd already decided were expendable. I walked into the living room. He followed. Audrey, please. I turned around. Did you ever intend to tell me? Yes. When? When I'd fixed everything. You couldn't fix this. I was trying. No. I shook my head. You were hiding it. He reached for my hand. I stepped back. That hurt him. Good. I never wanted to hurt you. You already did. I love you. I looked around the room. The empty spaces on the shelves suddenly stood out like missing teeth. Every gap represented a lie. Every missing heirloom represented another promise he'd broken. How many? He frowned. What? How many family pieces did you sell? He was silent. Gavin. He answered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. 12. 12. I had noticed 4. There were 8 more I hadn't even realized were gone. My grandmother's hand-stitched quilt. My great-grandfather's brass telescope. My father's military medals. The carved wooden jewelry box my aunt had made. Gone. All of them. I sat down slowly. The betrayal wasn't just financial anymore. It was personal. Every object he'd sold had been irreplaceable. Money could buy similar antiques. It could never buy those memories back. Then something Lillian had said returned to me. There were inconsistencies. I looked up. What paperwork did you sign? He blinked. What? The auction paperwork. I signed the consignment forms. In your own name? Yes. Did you tell them those heirlooms belonged to me? He hesitated. That tiny hesitation was enough. Gavin. He closed his eyes. I told them they belonged to both of us. And the ring? His face drained of color. I said it had been gifted to me. I stood. No. He looked confused. What? You didn't just betray me. I could hear the steel entering my own voice. You lied. I had to. You committed fraud. He opened his mouth to argue, but neither of us could ignore the truth anymore. And for the first time since we'd met 16 years earlier, I realized my husband wasn't just hiding debts. He was hiding the kind of man he had become. I barely slept that night. Gavin stayed in the guest room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the old farmhouse settle under the weight of fresh snow. Every creak in the walls reminded me of how many generations of my family had lived under that roof before me. My great-grandparents had built that house with their own hands. My grandparents had celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in the dining room. My parents had danced in the kitchen whenever their favorite jazz records played. Every room held a memory. And somehow, while I was preserving history at the museum every day, I hadn't realized history was disappearing from my own home. At 6 the next morning, I made coffee without asking Gavin if he wanted any. That had never happened before. For 16 years, I automatically poured 2 mugs. Now I poured 1. He walked into the kitchen looking 10 years older. I didn't sleep. I did, I lied. He looked at me hopefully. I've been thinking. So have I. I'll fix this. How? I'll get another loan. I actually laughed. You still don't understand. I do. No, Gavin. I met his eyes. You think this is about money. It is. No. I shook my head. This is about trust. He sat down. I made terrible decisions. You made hundreds of them. Silence filled the kitchen. After several moments, I picked up my purse. I'm going to the auction house. I'll come. No. I should explain. They've already heard your explanation. His shoulders dropped. I don't know what to do. For the first time in years. I picked up my keys. Neither do I. The drive to the Ashcroft Heritage Auction Gallery took nearly an hour. It occupied an old brick building just outside downtown Burlington, renovated to preserve its 19th century architecture. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed how quiet it was. No loud bidding, no crowds, just polished wood floors, carefully displayed antiques, and the unmistakable scent of old paper and furniture wax. A woman in her early 60s approached me with kind eyes. You must be Audrey. Lillian? She smiled gently. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I. She led me into a private office. Several cardboard archive boxes sat neatly against one wall. My heart skipped. They're here. I wanted everything removed from the main collection. She opened the first box. There it was. Grandma Eleanor's silver tea service. I reached out carefully. My fingertips traced the tiny scratch near the handle, the one my grandmother had made when she'd accidentally dropped a serving spoon during Thanksgiving dinner in 1987. I remembered everyone laughing while she insisted the scratch gave the tray character. I burst into tears. Not loud sobs. Just silent tears I couldn't stop. Lillian quietly handed me a tissue. I'm so sorry. I looked into the second box. Grandfather's pocket watch, the brass telescope, mother's crystal vase, the carved jewelry box. Piece after piece, some wrapped carefully, others stacked carelessly. As if they were ordinary merchandise. They're all here? She hesitated. Not exactly. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? Your husband consigned 12 items. Yes. We recovered 7. Recovered? The other 5 were sold privately before they reached auction. Everything inside me froze. What? The auction collection wasn't the first transaction. I gripped the edge of the table. 5 items are already gone? She nodded sadly. I'm afraid so. My grandmother's quilt. My father's military medals. The antique music box. 2 porcelain figurines my great-aunt had brought from England after World War II. Gone. I covered my face. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Lillian broke the silence. I need to show you something. She opened a folder. Inside were copies of the consignment documents Gavin had signed. At first glance, everything looked official. Then I noticed the signature line. Owner, Audrey Sinclair Mercer. I frowned. I've never signed this. You didn't. I looked closer. It looked almost exactly like my handwriting. Almost. The loops on the letters were slightly different. The pressure wasn't mine. But to anyone who didn't know me, it would have passed. I looked at Lillian. "This is forged," she nodded. "That's why I delayed the auction." My chest tightened. "He forged my signature." "I'm sorry." I suddenly remembered something. 2 years earlier, Gavin had bought me an expensive fountain pen for our anniversary. He joked that my signature looked elegant with it. Several times he'd ask me to sign birthday cards using that pen because he liked how it looked. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet. Now, I wondered if he'd been practicing. Lillian slid another document toward me. He also provided a notarized declaration. I stared at it. The statement claimed the collection was jointly owned marital property. It wasn't. Every single heirloom had been specifically listed in my mother's estate documents. Legally, they belonged only to me. I looked up. Did the notary actually witness this? We've already contacted her. And? She says your husband arrived alone. I blinked. Alone? He claimed you had an emergency at work and had signed everything beforehand. I felt sick. So he lied to her too. Lillian nodded. She was devastated when we informed her. For a long moment, I simply stared at the forged signature. My own name. Used against me. Before leaving, Lillian handed me a business card. "There's someone I'd like you to speak with." I read the name. Owen Carlisle, attorney. Estate and property law. He specializes in ownership disputes involving inherited property. I've never needed a lawyer. I hope you never need one again after this. She paused. But I think you need one now. Instead of driving home, I went directly to Owen Carlisle's office. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and the calm voice of someone who had spent decades listening before speaking. After hearing everything, he folded his hands on his desk. "I have good news." I wasn't expecting those words. "You do?" "Yes." He pointed toward the documents. "These heirlooms were inherited before marriage?" "Most of them. The rest were inherited during the marriage but solely through your family?" "Yes." "They're almost certainly separate property." Relief washed over me. "So they're legally mine?" "Based on what you've told me." He nodded. "Yes." "What about the forged signature?" His expression hardened. "That's another matter." "Worse?" "Potentially." He carefully chose his words. "If someone knowingly signs another person's name to transfer property they don't legally own." He paused. "That becomes much more serious than a marital disagreement." I swallowed. "I don't want revenge. I understand. I just want my family's history back. And that's exactly where we'll begin." He leaned forward. "I'd also like to review your financial records." "Why?" "Because people who hide one financial secret," he looked directly at me, "often hide others." That evening, I returned home carrying copies of every document. Gavin was sitting exactly where I'd left him that morning. He stood as soon as I entered. "How did it go?" I laid the papers on the dining table. He glanced at them. His face immediately turned pale. "They showed you." "Yes. I can explain." I looked at the forged signature, then back at him. "When did you learn to write my name?" His mouth fell open. Was it before or after you stole from me?" He stared at the floor. "I never meant." I slammed the papers onto the table. "For 16 years. My voice trembled. "I believed I was married to an honest man." Tears filled his eyes. "I made mistakes." "No." I shook my head slowly. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. A mistake is buying the wrong birthday gift." I pointed at the documents. "This?" I could barely breathe. I was planned. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything either of us had ever carried. Then, quietly, without anger or shouting, I asked the question that had suddenly become impossible to ignore. "Gavin, if you're willing to forge my signature..." I looked straight into his eyes. "What else have you forged?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the fear on his face told me there was something even bigger he hadn't confessed yet. Gavin never answered my question. Instead, he sat down heavily, buried his face in his hands, and stayed silent. I had spent 16 years believing silence meant someone was gathering the courage to tell the truth. Now I understood something different. Sometimes silence meant the truth was even worse than you imagined. I picked up the documents from the table and walked upstairs. That night, I locked my bedroom door. Not because I thought Gavin would hurt me, because I no longer knew who he was. The next morning, I called the museum and requested a week's leave. For the first time in my career, I couldn't concentrate on preserving anyone else's history while my own was falling apart. At 10 o'clock, I met Owen Carlyle again. He already had a thick folder waiting on his desk. I spent part of yesterday reviewing the documents you emailed. You found something? I found several things. My stomach tightened. He slid one document toward me. Did you and Gavin refinance your home 4 years ago? No. Are you certain? Positive. We paid off our mortgage 6 years ago. He nodded slowly. I thought you might say that. He placed another document beside the first. It carried the address of our farmhouse. The signatures looked painfully familiar. One belonged to Gavin. The other was supposed to be mine. I stared at it. No. I'm afraid so. I've never seen this before. The property was used as collateral. My ears rang. For what? A line of credit. How much? He turned the page toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face. $350,000. I whispered the number twice before it made sense. No. Owen remained calm. The loan was approved because both owners supposedly signed. I didn't. I know. I looked at him. My house? He nodded gently. Was put at risk without my knowledge. The room suddenly felt too small. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, people strolled through downtown Burlington carrying coffee cups, chatting, laughing. Their lives continued as normal. Mine had just split into a before and an after. When? I finally asked. The paperwork was filed just over 3 years ago. 3 years? The same timeline Gavin had admitted to gambling. So every lie, I whispered, started then. It appears that way. I turned back toward Owen. Can they take my home? They could have. Could have. The loan has already defaulted. I stared at him. What? The lender has begun collection proceedings. I couldn't breathe. And Gavin never told me? He may have been trying to solve it before you found out. By selling my family's heirlooms. Owen nodded. That appears to have been his plan. For several minutes, I simply sat there. Then another question surfaced. Why hasn't anyone contacted me? They tried. What? They mailed notices. I check our mailbox every day. He looked at me carefully. Do you? His question hit me like a punch. No. I didn't. Gavin always insisted on collecting the mail. He said it helped because he got home earlier. I had never questioned it. Not once. When I returned home, Gavin was carrying groceries into the kitchen. He smiled weakly. I picked up your favorite soup. I looked at him with fresh eyes. The groceries, the coffee, the quiet routines. Had they all been distractions? Gavin. He stopped. Did you refinance our home? His shoulders froze. Did you? He slowly closed the refrigerator. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice. They were going to ruin us. You already did. He rubbed both hands over his face. I thought I could fix everything before you noticed. I laughed bitterly. You forged my signature. I panicked. You forged legal documents. I know. You hid collection notices. He looked away. I stepped closer. You intercepted my mail. Still no answer. Gavin. Finally, he whispered, yes. Every admission chipped away at whatever remained of our marriage. You stood beside me every Sunday in church. His eyes filled with tears. You held my hand while I buried my mother. I know. You promised to protect me. I know. So tell me. My voice cracked. When exactly did protecting me become stealing from me? He broke down. For several minutes, he cried harder than I'd ever seen. Part of me wanted to comfort him. The larger part remembered my mother's ring sitting inside an auction box. That afternoon, Owen called. I have another update. I almost dreaded answering. What now? I tracked the buyers of the 5 heirlooms sold privately. Hope flickered inside me. You found them? 4. What about the 5th? We're still searching. I immediately grabbed my coat. Can I buy them back? Possibly. The first buyer lived just outside Montpelier. An elderly retired teacher named Harold Benton. He welcomed us into his home before I had even finished explaining why we were there. I'm terribly sorry, he said after hearing the story. I bought the music box because my late wife collected them. He carefully carried it from a display cabinet. I had no idea. When he placed it into my hands, tears filled my eyes. "I'll reimburse every dollar you paid," he smiled kindly. "No. I insist. So do I." He gently pushed my hands away. "Some things shouldn't have been sold." I hugged him before leaving. Not everyone in the world measured value in money. The second buyer wasn't nearly as kind. She had purchased my grandmother's quilt through a private antiques broker. "I'm not returning it. I'll pay double. No, triple." She folded her arms. "It belongs in my collection. It belonged to my grandmother." "I'm sorry," she wasn't. The conversation ended there. As we walked back to Owen's car, disappointment settled over me. "You can't force her?" I asked. "Not without litigation." "I don't care." Owen looked at me. "You understand that could take months. I've already lost years." Later that evening, Lillian called. "I thought you should know something." "What is it?" "The auction staff have been talking." "About Gavin?" "Yes." "What happened?" "There was another man with him the day he delivered your heirlooms." I frowned. "I thought he came alone." "He signed alone." "So who was the other man?" "We didn't know his name." My heartbeat quickened. "What did he look like?" "Tall. Mid-50s. Gray beard." She hesitated. "He seemed familiar with your husband." "You think they knew each other?" "I'm certain they did." My mind raced. Gavin told me the gambling debt involved anonymous lenders. This man didn't look like a lender. "What did he look like?" Lillian answered quietly. "Like a business partner." The words echoed in my head long after the call ended. Business partner. Not lender. Partner. Which meant one terrifying possibility. Maybe Gavin hadn't acted alone. Maybe someone had helped him. Maybe someone had encouraged him. Or perhaps, someone had been waiting for my family's heirlooms all along. The following morning, I searched through Gavin's home office while he was out. For years, I'd respected his privacy. Now, I was searching for the truth. Most drawers contained ordinary paperwork, tax returns, utility bills, office supplies. Then I noticed one drawer that wouldn't open completely. Something blocked it from the back. I removed the drawer entirely. A thin brown envelope had been taped underneath the desk. My pulse quickened. Inside were photocopies of deeds, loan agreements, wire transfer receipts, and a business card. The card contained only one name. Miles Corbett. No company, no address, just a phone number. Beneath the card was a handwritten note in Gavin's unmistakable handwriting. "Miles says the Sinclair collection is worth much more than we first estimated. Once everything is sold, we'll both be free." I read the sentence again and again. "We'll both be free." Not I'll. We'll. Every excuse Gavin had given me about acting alone collapsed in an instant. He hadn't simply made desperate decisions. Someone had been advising him, planning with him, profiting alongside him. I carefully placed every document back into the envelope. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just looking at a husband drowning in debt. I was looking at the outline of a deliberate scheme, and whoever Miles Corbett was, I had a feeling he knew exactly where the rest of my family's missing history had gone. I didn't confront Gavin about Miles Corbett, not yet. For the first time since our marriage began unraveling, I had something Gavin didn't know I possessed. Evidence. If I had learned anything over the previous week, it was that every time I confronted him too early, he simply found another lie to hide behind. This time, I wanted the truth before he had a chance to rewrite it. I slipped the envelope into my briefcase and drove straight to Owen Carlyle's office. He looked up the moment I walked in. "That expression tells me you found something." I think I found the reason none of this ever made sense. I handed him the envelope. For nearly 15 minutes, he read every document in silence. The deeper he went, the more serious his expression became. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "This changes everything." "How?" He tapped one of the wire transfer receipts. "Your husband wasn't just borrowing money." "What do you mean?" "He was receiving payments." I frowned. "Payments for what?" "I believe these are advance payments." "For the heirlooms?" He nodded. He wasn't selling family treasures because he suddenly became desperate. My stomach tightened. He had already agreed to sell them. The realization hit me like ice water. The missing heirlooms hadn't been emergency decisions. Someone had planned their sale months in advance. I closed my eyes. "How long?" Owen turned another page. The earliest transfer dates back almost 20 months. 20 months! Nearly 2 years before the auction house called me, my grandmother's tea service had been marked for sale while I was happily setting the table for Christmas dinner. The thought made me physically ill. Owen picked up the business card. Miles Corbett. I've never heard that name before. Neither have I. He reached for his computer. Let's see if he's as invisible as he wants to be. For several minutes he searched quietly. Then he stopped typing. I found him. My heart pounded. Who is he? He owns a company. What kind? Owen turned the monitor toward me. Corbett Estate Acquisitions. The company specialized in purchasing antiques, inherited collections, and historical estates. I stared at the screen. He buys family heirlooms. Yes, but there's more. He opened another file. The business has been sued 3 times. For what? Questionable ownership disputes. Meaning, families claimed valuable heirlooms were acquired through deception. A cold chill settled over me. So this wasn't the first time. No. Owen folded his hands. And I doubt it will be the last. 3 days later, we met with Detective Elias Turner from the County Financial Crimes Unit. He listened patiently while Owen presented the documents, the forged signatures, the hidden loans, the auction paperwork, the advance payments, the note mentioning Miles. When we finished, Detective Turner remained silent for several moments. Finally, he asked one question. Mrs. Sinclair, yes? Has your husband ever mentioned meeting people through investment groups? I thought carefully. Then I remembered. About 3 years earlier, Gavin had started attending what he called financial networking dinners. He always described them as seminars for people interested in retirement investing. I'd never questioned it, he did. The detective nodded. We've heard that before. What do you mean? He opened a folder from his own briefcase. Inside were photographs of several men. One of them was Miles Corbett. Another man had a neatly trimmed gray beard. Recognition hit me instantly. Lillian described him. The man at the auction house? Yes, Turner nodded. His name is Russell Pike. What does he do? He identifies families with valuable inherited collections. My heart stopped. You mean, they target people? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They befriend someone with access to valuable property. They encourage risky investments. They create debt. And when the victim becomes desperate, I finished the sentence myself. They convince them to liquidate family assets. The detective gave a slow nod. We believe that's exactly what happened. For the first time, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not forgiveness. Pity. Gavin had betrayed me. There was no changing that. But perhaps, he had also been manipulated. That didn't excuse his choices. He had forged my name, hidden the mail, lied for years, sold my family's history. Those were his decisions. Still, maybe someone else had taught him how. That evening, I returned home, determined to hear everything. Gavin was sitting alone on the back porch, staring across the snow-covered fields. He looked exhausted, older, broken. I sat beside him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then I quietly placed Miles Corbett's business card between us. Gavin stared at it. Every color drained from his face. Where did you get that? Your desk. He closed his eyes. It's over. Not yet. I folded my hands. I know about Miles. Silence. I know about Russell. He looked at me in disbelief. I know they targeted families with heirlooms. His breathing became uneven. I know they promised you'd recover your losses. His shoulders began shaking. Finally, he whispered, I ruined everything. I waited. No interruptions. No accusations. Just silence. After nearly a minute, he finally began talking. It started with one dinner. He stared into the distance. I lost money in an investment. They told me successful people never quit after one loss. So I invested again. I lost again. They introduced me to sports betting. They said it was temporary. They said I could recover everything. His voice cracked. When I couldn't, he looked down at his hands. Miles said inherited collections were wasted sitting in cabinets. He said history belonged in museums. He said I could buy everything back later. Tears rolled down his face. And I believed him. I listened quietly. I never meant to sell your mother's ring. Then why did you? He swallowed hard. Because by then, he looked at me with unbearable shame. I owed people who weren't willing to wait. You could have told me. I was too ashamed. So instead, my own voice trembled. You destroyed the one thing you were trying to protect. He nodded. I know. 2 weeks later, Detective Turner called. We've executed search warrants. You found something? We recovered storage records. And the remaining heirlooms. I nearly dropped the phone. All of them? Almost. My eyes filled with tears. The quilt? Recovered. My father's medals? Recovered. The porcelain figurines? Recovered. I couldn't believe it. What about the fifth item? There was a pause. The sapphire ring. My heart pounded. Wasn't in storage. I stopped breathing. Where is it? We believe Miles kept it. Why? He considered it too valuable to sell. I closed my eyes. The ring my mother had placed in my hand. The last gift she ever gave me. It was still missing. And somewhere out there, Miles Corbett was holding the one piece of my family I wanted back more than anything else. I made myself one quiet promise. I had spent weeks fighting to recover my family's history. I wasn't stopping now. Not until my mother's ring came home. The morning Detective Elias Turner called again. I was standing in my grandmother's kitchen. Not my kitchen. I had stopped calling it mine. Every room in that farmhouse still belonged to the generations who had loved it before me. I was simply the next caretaker. I was polishing the silver tea service that had finally returned home when my phone rang. Mrs. Sinclair? Yes. We've located Miles Corbett. I closed my eyes. Where? He was arrested early this morning while attempting to leave the state. I didn't speak. We also recovered something from his personal safe. My heart began pounding so hard I thought he could hear it through the phone. The sapphire ring. I covered my mouth. After weeks of trying to stay strong, I cried. Not because of its value, not because another heirloom had been recovered, because I could almost hear my mother's voice again. Protect what tells our story. This time, I had. 3 days later, Owen accompanied me to the evidence office. The detective carefully placed a small sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was the sapphire ring. It looked exactly as I remembered. The tiny scratch on one side of the band. The deep blue stone my father had saved for nearly 2 years to afford. Even the delicate engraving inside. Forever begins at home. Those words had been my parents' private promise to each other. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, just as it always had. I couldn't stop smiling through my tears. It's home, I whispered. Detective Turner nodded. It belongs there. The criminal investigation moved quickly after that. Miles Corbett, Russell Pike, 2 additional associates. Their offices contained records of dozens of families, photographs of inherited collections, property records, financial information, even handwritten notes describing which family members appeared easiest to influence. Reading those reports made me physically ill. We hadn't been chosen by chance. They had studied us. They knew I worked long hours at the museum. They knew Gavin managed our finances. They knew my family had inherited valuable antiques. They hadn't stumbled into our lives. They had quietly walked into them. Gavin accepted a plea agreement. That decision surprised many people. It didn't surprise me. For the first time in years, he finally stopped lying. He admitted to forging my signature. He admitted to concealing financial notices. He admitted to falsely claiming ownership of my family's heirlooms. Most importantly, he agreed to testify against Miles Corbett and Russell Pike. The prosecutor later told me his testimony connected pieces of the investigation they had struggled to prove. It didn't erase what he'd done. Nothing could. But it meant other families might never experience what mine had. The day I testified, I wasn't nervous. I was tired. Tired of secrets. Tired of paperwork. Tired of remembering every lie. Miles Corbett barely looked at me as I walked into the courtroom. He still carried himself like a successful businessman. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, confident smile. Until the evidence began appearing on the courtroom screens. The forged contracts, wire transfers, recorded phone conversations, storage unit records, photographs, emails. One by one, the polished image disappeared. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecutor asked only one question. Mrs. Sinclair, yes. What was the most valuable item taken from your home? Everyone expected me to say, the sapphire ring. or the silver tea service, or the pocket watch. Instead, I looked directly at the jury. My trust. The courtroom became completely silent. The antiques came home. I swallowed. The trust didn't. Several jurors quietly wiped away tears. Even Miles looked down. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty. On every major count. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, property crimes, financial exploitation. As the judge read the sentences, I didn't feel victorious. Justice and happiness aren't the same thing. Justice simply means the truth finally matters. My divorce from Gavin became final 6 months later. People often ask whether I hated him. The answer surprises them. No. Hatred requires energy. By then, I had none left to give. What I felt instead was grief. I mourned the man I believed I'd married, because somewhere between one bad investment and hundreds of lies, that man had disappeared. Before we left the courthouse after signing the final papers, Gavin asked if we could speak privately. We stood beneath the old maple tree outside. Snow was beginning to melt. Spring was finally arriving. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." "No." His voice broke. "You don't." He looked at the farmhouse in the distance. "I stole much more than heirlooms." I remained silent. "I stole your peace." Tears filled his eyes. "I stole your memories." Another pause. "And I stole the feeling that home was safe." For the first time in months, I saw complete honesty in his face. Not excuses, not blame, just truth. "I hope one day," he whispered, "you'll remember at least one good thing about me." I thought carefully before answering. "There was a time when you helped make that house feel like home." He nodded slowly. "I'll always be grateful for that." It wasn't forgiveness, it was simply the truth. Then we walked away in opposite directions. Neither of us looked back. A year later, I made a decision that would have surprised the woman I used to be. I donated one room of the farmhouse to the County Historical Museum. Not permanently, just as a rotating exhibit. The exhibit was called Objects That Remember. Visitors came from all over Vermont. Not because the antiques were extraordinarily valuable, because every object carried a handwritten story about the people who had loved it. Grandma Eleanor's tea service, Grandfather Samuel's pocket watch, the music box, the telescope, the quilt, the medals, the jewelry box, and finally, my mother's sapphire ring. The ring never stayed in the exhibit overnight. Each evening, it came home with me, exactly where it belonged. One afternoon, a little girl visiting the exhibit looked up at me and asked, "Why didn't you sell all these things after you got them back?" I smiled. "Because they're not really mine." She looked confused. "They belong to my grandparents. But they're gone." I nodded. "They trusted me to remember them." She thought about that for a moment before smiling. "Oh, I get it. They're borrowed." I laughed softly. "Exactly." She skipped back to her parents, and I stood there thinking about how wisdom sometimes comes from the smallest voices. None of us truly own the stories we've inherited. We simply protect them until it's someone else's turn. Looking back now, I no longer measure wealth by what sits inside a bank account. I measure it by the names written inside old books, by handwritten recipes stained with flour, by quilts sewn one careful stitch at a time, by rings passed from one generation to the next. Because debt can empty an account, greed can empty a house. But love is what gives ordinary objects extraordinary meaning. And that is something no thief, no auction, and no lie will ever be able to sell. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If Audrey's journey touched your heart, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and tell us, what family heirloom means the most to you, and why? If you enjoyed this emotional story of betrayal, resilience, and justice, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. Share this video with someone who believes that the truth always finds its way home. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the stories that make your family who they are.